Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was adopted by Inoichi. Inoichi's decision to adopt the boy was a spur-of-the-moment thing, but he stood by it, and he could not be prouder of both his children, even if they lived to give him gray hair. Or, how a Yamanaka-trained Naruto went and cheerfully dismantled the last shreds of Sasuke's self-image, because conventional therapy obviously wasn't working well enough, and then proved that even the best minds could be entirely dumb when it came to romance. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 9, Consultations. Is this, really okay, Ino-chan? Asked Hinata-chan, looking around as though every other customer at the ice cream stall might turn out to be her father in disguise. I promise, Hinata-chan, Ino assured her, feeling sad and angry at the same time. Hinata-chan pushed her fingers together while they waited in the line. It was a gesture Ino recognized. The girl did it all the time, which suggested that she was nervous all the time, and she catalogued it with other little quirks of interest. Is there anything that would make you more comfortable? Ino had a working theory about her classmate, and it was bad form to try and get answers that would support it. It could end with bias and misdiagnosis. On the other hand, Dad always told her to trust her instincts, so she plowed on. A toy? Or a favorite weapon? There wasn't much difference with ninja children. Hinata-chan clenched her fists in her hoodie and lowered her head in shame. It was their turn at the counter, and Ino could already tell that she wouldn't get any input from her companion on what to order, so she asked for a banana split for them to share. Surely that would contain some flavors Hinata-chan liked? They were spoon-deep into the ice cream. Preferred flavors so far were vanilla and yogurt. Apparently, when Hinata-chan whispered, there was a doll. From mother. But father ordered Hanabi-chan to destroy it. Ino clamped her teeth tight on the very, very bad words that were about to come out of her mouth. So, regardless of whether she was right about her hunch, the final diagnosis would have psychological and emotional abuse tacked on. Have some more ice cream, Hinata-chan, she said, wondering what there was you could say to someone whose precious gift from their dead mom that she regarded as a substitution object was used against them like that. It was a miracle Hinata-chan was even verbal after something like that. Nearly everybody Ino knew thought Hinata-chan was weak and a coward, when in fact she was apparently one of the bravest and strongest among Ino's peers. If Ino couldn't help her, she was going to drag Dad over, because Hinata-chan was more important than just a project. But before she resorted to any desperate measures, there were still a few less radical steps to take. He's pissed at me, Yoshi whined, morosely chucking shuriken after shuriken into the target. He was scoring well enough, but obviously not focused. He could do a lot better than that if he tried. Ino had, of course, noticed that Sasuke-kun was upset. That corner of the classroom was an Arctic zone lately, so much so that even the fan club girls didn't dare sit next to it. The teachers, except Irika-sensei, had collectively decided not to call on Sasuke-kun in class. Sasuke-kun had not shared his woes with anyone, but Ino had just known it was somehow Yoshi's doing. What did you do? Yoshi threw 2 shuriken at once. One hit an inch from the bullseye, the other went wide and struck the wall. I might have, in not so many words, told him he was stupid. Ino whistled. Telling Sasuke-kun he was stupid was the equivalent of waving a red flag at a bull. That's not the worst part, Yoshi moaned. Oh? Yoshi went to collect the shuriken while Ino deliberated about whether she felt like joining him for throwing practice or giving up for the day. The worst part is that I can't apologize. Because he is being stupid. Stupid wasn't the right word, of that Ino was sure, because Sasuke-kun was smart enough for top marks. But Sasuke-kun was also the last person out of their class Ino would have wanted to rely on to cover her back, and there was a reason for that. And it wasn't because she doubted his skills. So, what's the plan? Are we consulting? Yoshi turned to face her, spinning a shuriken on his finger. Might as well, Ino decided. Yup. I'm hitting snag after snag with Hinata-chan too, so let's consult, brother. It's too bad we can't switch, Naruto grumbled. Hinata was so nice and quiet and calm when she stopped being so anxious, and he understood that those were all symptoms of the problem, but it had to be good to have a moment without arguing now and then. Ino seemed to agree wholeheartedly. It was probably just as frustrating to be getting no reaction, other than apologies, from her subject, no matter how she tried to provoke it. Yeah, Ino agreed. I really thought that was, like, the most useless rule of all those Dad gave us. Like, why would we ever want to? I want to. Ino, what if we henge into each other? Dad will figure it out in 2 seconds. She crushed a walnut between her forefinger and thumb, and popped the core into her mouth. Even if we only do it at the academy. You've got an idea? I've got a Shino. And I'm not afraid to use him. Ino leered. Details. Not like that, you perv, Naruto groaned, but he was grinning too. If he had to pick someone from their class to date, Shino would absolutely be his first choice. He's a piece on the board, and he's one of the good ones. But he needs a shield against Sasuke's fangirls that's not Sasuke, because that would end in bloodshed and possibly Dad disinheriting us. Or trading us for the Hyuga like he threatened. I've got a Hinata that needs to feel appreciated dash. Which Dad could totally do for her, Dad's the best dash. Let's not plan on getting ourselves disinherited? Ino suggested dryly. She crushed another walnut, ate the core, and then inquired, so, how do we set up Shino and Hinata without you interfering directly in my project? That one was easy. By making it a double date. Double friend date. And ditching them. Naruto confirmed. Hinata was so hungry it was a wonder her stomach didn't growl. Nevertheless, she would wait until the others started eating, taking her cues mainly from Ino-chan. But Ino-chan didn't reach for a stick of dumplings. Crap, is that the time? She exclaimed with her customary unthinking, bold crudeness. Hinata had been initially appalled by it, but she also wished she dared speak like that. Yoshikun frowned, and then his eyes widened in shock. Was that today? Tuesday, idiot. Ino-chan emphasized. Crap. Yoshikun chanted, leaping over the back of the bench so he wouldn't have to climb out over Shino-kun. I'm so sorry, Hinata-chan, Ino-chan said, I completely forgot, and my useless brother didn't remind me dash. Hey! Yoshikun protested. I forgot too, and you didn't remind me dash. Stop arguing and move. Ino-chan demanded. We're so late dash. I'm so sorry, Shino, see you tomorrow, enjoy the dango for us. A moment later they were both gone. Hinata stared after them and then, reluctantly, turned forward. There was a plate full of dumplings on the table in between herself and Shino-kun. It was too much food for 2 people. They would have to ask the staff to pack it for them. Hinata could not do that. She hated leaving food, but talking to strangers made her nervous, and she didn't know what to do. It would be illogical to not eat, Shino-kun pointed out. Hinata nodded. And wished that her hair was longer, so she could hide behind it. That was the reason why father had given the instruction for her haircut to be kept short. There were very few short-haired people in the clan. Hinata felt her lower lip tremble. If you find me intimidating, said Shino-kun, there is no reason to force yourself to endure my presence out of politeness dash. No. Hinata realized it was herself who had shouted. She blushed and looked down at her hands. She had to explain that. She couldn't just leave it at that. Shino-kun would think she was weird, he probably already thought so, anyway, but Hinata didn't want to offend him. Shino-kun is nice. She wished the earth would open and swallow her. She felt Shino-kun watching her, and instinctively activated the Byakugan. Suddenly their eyes were meeting through Shino-Koen's sunglasses, and Shino-Koen seemed to panic a little, which made Hinata panic a little and... "Please stay and eat," he said. Hinata's hands clenched around the edge of the bench. She took a couple of deep breaths, and then nodded. She could do this. She could eat dango with her classmate, who was being nice to her. She really could. "She's staying," Yoshi confirmed finally, withdrawing from the edge of the roof to join Ino in the hideout behind a weather station. "If Shino's bugs find us here, that whole performance was for nothing," Ino pointed out tersely. Her brother rolled his eyes. "Shino's smart. If his Kakachu find us here, he'll know the whole performance was for Hyuga-chan's benefit. And by now he's already seeing why we've done it." "She's really staying?" Ino asked incredulously. "I mean, I hoped, but I really thought she would run dash." "She's staying," Yoshi repeated reassuringly, and smiled. "And she's already freaked Shino out. This is going great." Sasuke's fangirls, if they still could be called that, of which he wasn't entirely sure, were about evenly split, flitting around Aburame, Hyuga, and the boy Yamanaka. Girl Yamanaka was, as usual lately, sitting side by side with Hyuga, and trying to get her to talk. Sasuke sympathized. Having a Yamanaka bother you until you responded to them out of self-defense was a terrible experience. On the brighter side, it meant that there were no fangirls left over to bother Sasuke. There was Inuzuka's dog, whom Sasuke did not mind in principle. It was tolerable for a dog ever since it had grown out of the tendency to piss on everything, and Inuzuka himself, whom Sasuke minded very much. He wished Iruka-sensei would come in already and save Sasuke from further, questionably, human interaction. And Sis said they sat there for 2 hours and Shino even got her to talk. "That's so unfair. I thought Hinata-chan only talked to teachers and maybe the Yamanaka." "'Cause I don't think you can really not talk to a Yamanaka if they want you to talk to them dash." It was a dark day when Sasuke agreed with Inuzuka on anything at all. But it was all okay until she went and talked to Shino. Sis said she laughed. "I haven't ever heard her laugh. This is so unfair dash." "Bite him," Sasuke muttered into his steepled fingers, "or I will stab him." "Why can't she laugh when I do something now?" "Akamaru." "Why?" The dog barked. The classroom door opened, Mizuki-sensei came in and finally, blessedly, Sasuke only had to endure the mind-numbing boredom of trivial and oftentimes plain incorrect subject matter. Since Sasuke usually gave the whole world a cold shoulder, it was a little difficult for him to inspire remorse from someone that offended him. He gave it a great try though. Shockingly. Because if he truly didn't care like he pretended, he never would have bothered. Naruto mentally gave him 5 stars out of 5 for the effort, and after a week of the Ice Princess act tossed out 4:30, Sasuke-kun, as he passed the boy's desk on his way out of the class. It was a gamble, but it paid off. Sasuke turned up at the training ground 6, still looking frosty, but perfectly willing to throw down. Their spar resulted in a broken arm for one and a dislocated collarbone for the other, so they stumbled together to the hospital, got yelled at by the attending medic Nin and sent home. Sasuke refused to participate in the social ritual of getting ice cream or dango, and Naruto wasn't really surprised. Still, interaction was happening, diagnosis was coming along, and Naruto was going to hit the books, try not to fall asleep over them and figure out what the heck was that missing cogwheel inside Uchiha's brain, so he could repair the clockwork and get that boy ticking again. "So, not apathy after all?" asked his sister, pulling one of Dad's books out of Naruto's hands before he could chuck it at the wall in a fit of frustration. Naruto tugged on his hair, harshly enough for it to hurt a bit. "He's overmotivated, but in a horrible direction. Tunnel vision, definitely. Sustained. Over years. Was Uchiha even salvageable?" Ino placed the book on top of the stack Naruto had removed from Dad's office, flopped down onto the sofa and grinned. "It's hot." Ino, for most people hot and crazier than a bag of cats thrown into the koi pond are not synonyms. Most people are stupid. That's a logical fallacy. Those statements may both be true, but that does not make them related. The real question you need to ask yourself, brother, is if he's too insane to feel fear. Is he? I mean, of course Sasuke-kun isn't afraid of anything, but really. Naruto thought back to their spars and their brief and catastrophic conversations. Inconclusive. Uchiha thinks he's got nothing left to lose. On one hand, that means he's not afraid of losing anything. On the other, it means he'll have no problems cutting himself off at the drop of a kunai. There you go. Showing there are things he has and doesn't want to lose. Or, I guess, give him some, because there's a good chance he's right about this. Ino raised herself on her elbow and pinned him with a glare. And Yoshi? If you kiss him before I get to, I'll make Sakura make your life not worth living. Naruto grimaced. For all his prettiness, Sasuke was like a bloodthirsty porcelain statue, or maybe a sun-resistant vampire. Not something he wanted to touch, much less touch intimately. But if he had wanted to, this wasn't much of a threat. Sakura-chan? The pink shadow with the bone-shattering left hook? Ino grinned, widely and toothily. Naruto wondered what he had missed. When she was younger, Hinata had imagined that she would prefer being a plant to being a human. She had daydreamed scenarios where she would have turned into a tree during the night, finally finding peace, and no amount of persuasion, threatening, or outright violence in the morning could make her revert to a clanswoman. She wondered if these revenge schemes counted as suicidal fantasies at the same time. Are you feeling unwell, Hinata-san? Shino-san. Hinata yelped. It was too early, the academy gates were not yet open. She had not expected to meet anyone here at this time. There is no reason for alarm, he assured her. Why? Because I mean you no harm. If my presence is distressful. No. Hinata assured him. No, Shino-san. How could she put it to words? How could she say that she preferred silence, but silence from other people disconcerted her because she did not know what it meant? How could she put into words that feeling where everyone who looked upon her found her wanting without sounding self-centered and like she was seeking reassurance? Ladybug, said Shino-san. Hinata stared, uncertain what it meant. The boy extended his hand and touched a small red creature crawling along one of the folds of Hinata's hoodie. She had not even noticed. Oh, she said, watching as the insect comfortably traversed Shino-san's finger. She finds you likable, Shino-san announced nonsensically. So do I. Please consider allowing me the privilege of friendship. Hinata had no clue what was happening. Except that it made her want to cry. She wished Ino-chan was here to advise her. But she nodded anyway, because she did find Shino-san likable in turn, quiet, calm, unlikely to shout, and very logical. And nice. Kami-sama, was Shino-san nice? Careful. Friendly. Hinata tried, even as her hands shook and her throat constricted. I would like that. October fell onto the village in the form of unceasing rain showers, but a few A-rank futon and Suiten jutsu strategically released around the village cleared up the weather long enough to make a proper party of it. Ino was going all out. The kimono, the hairstyle, the makeup, she was on point tonight. She put on a vapid expression, checked in the mirror that nobody would expect her to have a functioning brain, and exited her room with a sing-song. I'm going to knock Sasuke-kun dead. Don't, her brother said dryly, joining her in the corridor. At least not until I've completed my project. Ino's discerning eye determined that Yoshi was nearly as pretty as herself, and she congratulated herself on having excellent taste. She had picked that kimono and forced it on him. It hadn't been too much of a fight, because Yoshi didn't honestly care beyond being allowed to keep his orange accessories, and she had counted on that. Besides, blue was absolutely his color. Like it was hers. The Yamanaka siblings did, as people had often remarked, look like movie stars. Now, kids, Dad trailed off when he spotted them coming down the stairs. There was a hint of a sinking jaw there, probably the uncomfortable realization that his little children weren't quite so little anymore. Ino could pass for 15 if she really tried, and Yoshi had jailbait written all over his wiry ninja muscles and intrained grace and wide blue eyes. It's our last QB festival as civilians. Yoshi preempted before Dad could bust out the overprotective routine. Let's enjoy the heck out of it. For a moment Dad obviously deliberated. Then he gave in and decided to trust them. Be safe. Yes, Dad, Ino replied with a bucket load of cheek. He huffed. Don't yes, Dad me, daughter, and just do it. I will, Dad. No promises regarding Yoshi dash. Yoshi can take care of himself, Dad countered, but he did give Ino's brother a cautioning look too. And he'll be careful, right? I will, Dad, Yoshi promised, smiling like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. It was unfair, Ino thought, falling into step with him. Stupid brother, with all that effortless pretty, when she had to work at it so hard and she'd still never achieve that sort of natural magnetism. Oh well. At least she would get to enjoy all the people making fools of themselves for him. She was right. An hour later Yoshi was play-acting that he was a mighty ninja fighting a fearsome monster, where the monster was Choji's squid on a stick. Choji was trying very hard not to fall over laughing, because that would disrupt the performance. Shikamaru was totally transfixed. Ino rolled her eyes. Who was he even kidding? How did you convince him to come out? Ino demanded breathlessly, staring at where Sasuke tried to ignore Ami's little sister and Ami's cousin hard enough that they would leave him the hell alone. Naruto chewed his chocolate-covered strawberry, enjoyed the explosion of taste on his tongue, and then smugly reported, just before Ino's temper got the better of her I didn't. And because Ino was on the verge of pulling a kanzashi out of her hair and cheerfully stabbing him to death, which would have been an awful waste of an expensive kimono, he added, I threatened him into coming out. With transforming a clone into him and having it do something public and embarrassing. Naruto noticed that his sister's eyes began to glaze and sighed. Not streaking, I don't want him to murder me in my sleep. Just like, overeating on ramen and puking his guts out in front of some council people or something. Disappointed, Ino went off into her happy place where Uchiha boys promenade naked through the streets. Naruto didn't get it, but whatever. It was her business. Fireworks? Suggested Sakura-chan, appearing behind Ino like the faithful shadow she aspired to be. I guess they'll start soon enough, Ino agreed. Let's see if we can abduct Hinata-chan along the way. Yoshi threatened Sasuke-kun into joining us. It'll be my pleasure, Naruto assured her, and they parted ways. Sasuke was not quite glad, that was too emotional a word, but relieved to be rescued from his admirers, who had managed to multiply in the past 2 minutes. The 10th girl joined just as Naruto wound and elbowed his way through the gaggle, put an arm around Sasuke's shoulders, gripped hard, and talked his way back out through the girl's loud voice, blinding smiles, honest compliments and assurances of a later meeting. Once they were in the clear, he released Sasuke, who snarled and readjusted his clothes. He wasn't wearing a kimono, that would have probably sent the girls into literal fits, but it looked like he had put on a clean t-shirt. For a single stupid, shallow moment Naruto envied him for not having a sister to force him into fancy clothes. Then Naruto thanked all the gods and demons he could think of for having a sister, and a family, and a clan, and basically a whole lot of things Sasuke didn't have. Fireworks, Sasuke-kun, he said, and more or less dragged the other boy to the roof of the water tank. Ino, Hinata and Sakura were already there, sharing the structure with the ANBU on duty. The first bright yellow flower bloomed across the sky with perfect timing, so that they didn't have to talk to the girls. And Sasuke, well, annoyed as he had initially been, there was something melancholy in him as he silently watched the sky and the bursts of colors across it. At one point he looked back over his shoulder and up, as if there was someone supposed to be standing there. Then his fists clenched and his teeth gritted, and he refused to look at the fireworks again. Naruto nudged him and whispered an offer to buy some sweets to share from one of the stalls down in the street, which he knew would be refused, both because Sasuke didn't like sweets and because Sasuke didn't like Yoshi. "Thanks for coming out, anyway," Naruto told him in a fit of magnanimity. "And sorry for being an ass about it before." Well, he wasn't really, but Sasuke left, without a word, for home with the reassurance that Yamanaka Yoshi was crushing on him hard, and would resort to unsavory methods to get his attention. They saw Hinata-chan safely to the gates of the Hyuga compound, handed Sakura off to her mother, and returned home to collapse in the living room, stuffed, full of impressions, and maybe needing to decompress a little before they went to bed. "I've got it," Yoshi announced giddily. "What?" Ino groaned and rolled over. She was beyond tired, but her brother, as always, turned out to be indefatigable. "I've got a theory. But it's completely crazy." "Well, so is Sasuke-kun," deadpanned Ino, too weary to censor herself. "So, your theory might be right." She considered the possibility for a while, and then decided that she was ready to be convinced by a convincing argument. "Show me." Yoshi made a clone, not one of the normal ones, he still couldn't do those, but one of the special ones that Dad taught him and refused to show Ino. The clone transformed into Sasuke-kun and reenacted a few of the moments of tonight, and then a few older scenes that Yoshi must have witnessed. Said Ino, watching the delightful drape of the fabric over Sasuke-kun's abdomen until the moment the clone dispersed. "What do you think?" Ino forced herself to let go of the fantasy and give a good, hard consideration to the evidence her brother had presented. "I think we need to consult this with Dad." "But it looks plausible." Yoshi was giving her the wide-eyed stare that begged for validation. Ino was never sure anymore if it was real. It had been once upon a time, she was sure of that, but for years now Yoshi could fake that perfectly. Sometimes he cared about what she thought, sometimes he didn't. She wished it were always the first case. She nodded. "Sasuke-kun looking at the world through a prism that distorts his every perception?" "You bet your arse, brother." Chapter 10, Shrinking. Chapter text. With seemingly nothing to precipitate the reaction, Hinata-chan stiffened. A moment later she hunched until she was almost curled up, gritting her teeth, and then bolted. Ino followed her without even thinking about it. Class would start in a minute, but the teacher, Mizuki or Iruka or whoever would bother to turn up today, could kiss her arse. Her subject, her friend, was more important. She arrived at the bathroom on Hinata's heels and remained standing by the sink, listening and forming a theory. When Hinata came out, ashen yet with embarrassed splotches of red high on her cheeks, Ino knew. "Are you in pain, Hinata-chan?" Hinata-chan shrugged. I can take it dash." "You're not supposed to take it." Ino insisted, a little harsher than Hinata-chan could really deal with in an already physically and emotionally vulnerable situation. "You're supposed to figure out what helps." Hinata-chan trembled and dodged when Ino tried to touch her. "I can't talk to anyone about this." Yes, Ino guessed, what with the Arse Backwards clan, the head up his Arse clan head, and the fact that her mother had died when Hinata was little. She might have had a bunch of older female relatives, but she was kept isolated from them too. Hinata-chan only knew what they were taught in the Kunoichi classes at the academy. Unbelievable. "Mum's always traveling," Ino started talking, hoping that Hinata-chan might relax, "but I went to Dad when I felt like shit. Even though I mostly just hoped I wouldn't have to go to school." She smiled, but didn't get the hoped-for smile back. Poor Hinata-chan was probably feeling too horrible for smiling. Dad was cool about it. "Told me what helped Mum, showed me where Mum keeps her secret stash of chocolate. Dad keeps replenishing it on the sly. It's sort of sweet, I just try not to think about the fact that it's my parents. Anyway, he gave me a bunch of tips, and then told me to ask Tomomi Bie-san if they didn't work for me. Tomomi Bie-san's a medic, so she knows dash." Hinata-chan started crying. Maybe, Ino realized in hindsight, she should have found a more neutral topic. Something that wouldn't remind Hinata that her own clan consisted of shitheads while other people had nice, loving families. Too late now. Ino gritted her teeth. Come with me. I'll take you home and hunt down Tomomi Bie-san for you. We'll have a female talk, and she'll write you an official note to cover the absence. Because, yes, Hyuga-sama was the kind of dick that would have taken it out on Hinata if she missed classes due to being in agony. Hinata-chan tried to protest, but Ino didn't give her the room. She pulled her down the corridor and out of the building. Yoshi would take care of their stuff. A quiet knock pulled Ino away from her magazine. She checked on Hinata-chan, still asleep on Ino's bed, and tiptoed to the door. Yoshi handed her both school bags and raised his eyebrows in a mute question. She's okay, Ino mouthed. Dinner, Yoshi mouthed back and raised 6 fingers. Ino nodded and looked over her shoulder with a mixture of worry and disgust. There was no way to let Hinata-chan rest longer than that without alerting the Hyuga that something was going on, which was the last thing Hinata-chan needed. Sasuke didn't understand what was happening. It started with the rumors of a council meeting being dismissed early because the Hyuga clan head came down with debilitating cramps, but since Sasuke had been denied his own clan headship until he either passed his 16th birthday or achieved the rank of Chunin, he didn't pay much attention to what happened to those windbags. If they decided to have a free-for-all melee fight and killed each other, he would sleep better at night. Tsum-sama was heard recommending a hot water bottle, Nara said to the attentive audience of the other clan heirs, who probably had a reason to care. Hyuga seemed to be trying to merge with the wall. Girl Yamanaka cackled with disturbing schadenfreude. Tell the best part, boy Yamanaka insisted breathlessly, face flushed. Nara grunted, like the demands on him were far too big to contend with when he just wanted to sleep, but he did answer. The hospital made Hayashi-sama wait, because they were busy tending to the Hyuga elders, who had been admitted because the floor collapsed under them during a clan meeting. A clan meeting without the clan head? Akimichi inquired suspiciously. Why would a floor collapse? Wondered Inuzuka. I've seen those guys, they're not fat. Stiff wind would blow them over. An opium beetle, suggested Aburame. Subsists on wood, and sometimes remains undiscovered for years, until the damage is so severe that the wood structure collapses. There was a while of silence while most of the group, including, surprisingly, Inuzuka, heard the implication behind the offhand comment and surveyed Aburame with new eyes. Sasuke found himself doing the same, although he at least was not surprised by Aburame's capabilities. He did not understand the boy's motivation. Why would Aburame have expended such efforts and taken such risks against people who had nothing to do with him? Was it something the Yamanaka asked of him? Both siblings looked adequately surprised and amused, but Sasuke knew that you could not believe their faces. Or was it Hyuga herself? If Sasuke suffered an inclination to kindness, he might have described Hyuga as unimpressive. A more honest assessment was useless. She could not even speak for herself, much less fight. Why would anyone consider her so important? No, it was more likely that the Yamanaka were using her as an unwitting pawn. Like they were trying to use Sasuke, as if he couldn't figure it out. Morons! I have such a crush on Shino, boy Yamanaka muttered to his sister just as they passed Sasuke on their way to their seats. Girl Yamanaka nodded. I think I'm beginning to see it. That stunt took huge balls of steel. Maybe Sasuke channeled a little chakra to his ears so he could hear what they said once they passed out of his natural earshot. So did yours, sisterer. Whatever are you talking about, Yoshi? Hyuga-sama in cramps? I may have 2 green thumbs as Mum says, but you've got encyclopedic knowledge of poisonous plants, and a vengeful streak to rival Sasuke Koen's. Sasuke realized he had been caught staring. He might have been caught listening in too, but that was harder to spot. By the way both Yamanaka beamed at him, they did not mind. It gave him something to think over. If the Yamanaka understood the need for revenge, and if they were willing to help Hyuga regardless of the inherent risks to themselves, and if they were approaching Sasuke similarly to how they had approached Hyuga, perhaps he could consider the concept of allies. What is the status on your projects? Inoichi asked, still somewhat jittery from Shikaku's interrogative hints. Tough luck for Shikaku though, this time Inoichi really didn't know anything. Mine's like a dream, reported Ino. Yoshi's more like a nightmare, but at least it's an interesting nightmare. Yoshi groaned theatrically. You've got it easy. Hinata actually wants help, so she's cooperating. Ino mockingly patted his shoulder. Poor thing is completely touch-starved. I've started with an intense aversion therapy dash. Is that what they call it? Oh, fine dash. Inoichi's intractable daughter rolled her eyes. She's a kitten. I want to pet her. I'll teach her to unsheath her claws, and somehow convince her that she's amazing along the way, and she'll be perfectly fine. She's genetically predisposed to that unnerving feline stare anyway. That more or less confirmed for Inoichi that his children did have something to do with the Hyuga disaster, although he had firmly decided to never learn anything incriminating at all. Plausible deniability was the name of the game, and also former head of TNI, which translated to very few people being willing to question him. And while Inoichi sympathized with Hayashi on great many occasions, he still agreed that Hayashi needed a few hard knocks to the head regarding his treatment of the Hyuga clan's children, most specifically his own and Hisashi's. Not now though. Now was not the time to get angry. Excellent. He pasted on a smile, content to see the relief in his children reduced from obvious to merely visible because he was watching for it. Ino, keep in mind that during the intense part of the therapy Hinata's self-perception may be absolutely dependent on your feedback. Make sure you don't break her with a careless comment. Or action. Don't forget about the Byakugan for a second. Yes, Dad. Don't yes, Dad me, daughter. Just keep that in mind. I will, Dad, she promised, serious enough that Inoichi accepted it. Yoshi? He prompted. The boy tugged on his ponytail. Still working on hooking the idiot. That's where the nightmare gets real interesting. Dad, I think he's actually got a whole liar's palace constructed, and I think it's been in place since the massacre. That was unorthodox at best. Inoichi was stunned that his son even knew of that technique, much less that he would have the confidence to believe he had discovered it in a subject which could not have had the skill to construct it. But he was not going to dismiss the idea before hearing the logic behind it. If you're right, it might explain why therapy didn't work for him. Yeah, Yoshi said with exasperation, nodding several times. And I asked around a bit. She knows a well of useful intel, and Sasuke's personality did a 180 after that night. Which, short-term, makes sense, but in the long term it should have normalized by now, at least somewhat. That kind of hyper-awareness and intense grief can't be sustained interminably. He'd run out of energy. But for Sasuke the shock hasn't healed. At all. Shino was in the same class and watched it all happen. So, I think that instead of normalizing, Sasuke locked himself up. That's a bold theory, Inoichi stated as non-committally as he could. It's got another part, Yoshi admitted, briefly meeting his sister's eye and receiving an encouraging nod, but I might need some confidential information before I can flesh it out. Inoichi raised an eyebrow. He certainly wasn't going to disclose anything sensitive. On the other hand, he hadn't expected either of his children to try and salvage a case so hopeless that he had been written off by psych completely. He wanted Yoshi to succeed, and was prepared to fudge the lines of security levels. Uchiha were famous for two things, contributed Ino. Stealing techniques and unbreakable genjutsu. Not unbreakable, Inoichi corrected. But it is true that Sharingan genjutsu is extremely difficult to counter. We used to use it at the department. Uchiha Shiori-san had never been cordial with her colleagues, which in an extreme environment such as TNI could be wearying, but Inoichi had respected her professional skills greatly. She, too, had been one of Itachi's victims. Was Itachi good at genjutsu? Yoshi continued fleshing out his theory. Prodigious is a closer word, Inoichi assured him. So, I think he put Sasuke under one. Inoichi nodded. That could not get him busted for sharing privileged information. Encouraged, Yoshi continued, and I think Itachi might have started building the Liar's Palace with that. And then Sasuke just learned to live inside it, even though the genjutsu was over. Interesting, Inoichi agreed. A liar's palace was a spy's technique, and only the best of the best managed to build one good enough to fool seals and train shinobi. Nobody would have searched for one in an 8-year-old. But a genjutsu-enforced one, compounded with trauma? Inoichi could buy it. I want you to follow up on that. He was sorry for the Uchiha boy if it turned out that Yoshi was correct in his assumptions. At the same time, he would be disgustingly proud if his barely 12-years-old son showed himself to be smarter than the bevy of therapists that had tried to figure the kid out. Yoshi had an immense gift for out-of-the-box thinking. In fact, some days Inoichi wondered if Yoshi even had a box, or if he had gotten rid of it a long time ago as an unnecessary baggage that dragged him down. So, Naruto said once Sasuke started flagging a little and the spar slowed down somewhat, why is it so important that you keep to the original plan? The question, predictably, angered Sasuke into another spurt of energy, and Naruto just barely dodged a Katon Jutsu that could have actually maimed him, or maybe not him, what with Jinchuriki superpowers, but definitely maimed someone. Yeah, I get that it's important, Naruto assured him, but we've also established, and you've agreed, that it's not a rational plan. It was stupid, but Naruto was trying not to use that precise formulation. It's a little inefficient, and it's a lot more time-consuming than necessary. Shut up! Insisted Sasuke, fingers flashing through seals for another Katon Jutsu. Look, Sasuke-kun, I think you're right. I agree, Itachi Youch. Naruto flattened himself on the ground, rolled over to dodge a kunai, and only just managed to stop himself from scurrying up a tree. Talk about a berserk button. Was the Liar's Palace trying to protect itself? Did it use Itachi's name as some sort of trigger for its defense mechanisms? Look, Naruto repeated, I just don't understand. That man dash. That was what Sasuke called his brother. Needs to be stopped. If you kill him, all the better. But all those things you're doing and saying don't bring you any closer to that goal dash. He dodged a barrage of shuriken and deflected a kunai with his own. Mizuki-sensei called Hinata-chan's name. Ino leaned closer to Sakura and whispered, let her fight the cool Sakura-chan today, please? Sakura thought about this request, really, although not one Ino was prepared to enforce if her natural leadership wasn't enough, and then nodded. She smiled and walked sedately into the circle, cataloging Hinata-chan's tells. There were many. The stance, the trembling, the pallor. Ino didn't say let her win. She didn't even mean let her win. But she could tell the exact moment when Sakura decided to let Hinata-chan win, because even Sakura could see that Hinata-chan needed this. And it was such a small, insignificant thing to give her. Ino would have done it herself, except that no one would have bought it, not even Hinata-chan, and that would have defeated the purpose. Hinata-chan needed to believe that she could win by her own merit. Another week, another spar. Today was kinda easy. Sasuke's nerves were so frayed that a lot of his hits and throws went wide, he didn't balance his stances well enough, and his focus was shot. He almost fell over when Naruto ducked away from a high kick. I get that you want to do it yourself, Naruto assured him, but why alone? Why not let somebody else hold his arms back, or tie him up for you? Why just throw yourself against him like it matters more which one of you is stronger than whether he dies? Why? Uchiha shouted. I don't have to explain myself to you. You don't even have to explain yourself to yourself. Naruto shouted back at him. You don't. But if you can't, that means you're just lying to yourself. So what? What if I lie to myself? You'll end up dead. And? You can't afford to, Naruto reminded him, hoping to Izanagi that this was just a case of Sasuke being too melodramatic and not honest-to-God suicidal ideation, although if it turned out Sasuke actively wanted to die, Naruto wouldn't even be surprised. You have a goal to accomplish, remember? I won't care when I'm dead. I guess you won't. That was, frankly, the whole point of the Pure Lands. But you care now. So let's do what you can to further your goals. Why do you care? Honestly, Naruto thought the absolute best thing he could say to the Sasuke right now would be the truth. It was something rational, something Sasuke would have understood and accepted and perhaps even be willing to exploit. Unfortunately, the rules forbade him. So, what he said instead was, the way you act now, you're going to get your teammates killed, and probably not even care. I care about a lot of our classmates. I don't want them to die because they had the bad luck to be on your team. Not to mention it might be you? Sasuke pointed out with something that almost resembled sarcasm. Which was a great stride forward. Sarcasm was humor, after all, even if it was the lowest kind. Better the lowest kind than none at all. Naruto shrugged. Might be. But probably not if you're the rookie. They'll pair you with Kiba. I guess. I mean, Shikamaru will probably score the perfect minimum passing score, 'cause it's a challenge, but his team assignment's been determined for years and he just does it to rebel. Sasuke was soaking up this information. It was sad that he hadn't known this. But it made sense. He didn't have parents at home to tell him these things. The Inoshikacho will get reformed, Naruto explained. They're not happy about it, except maybe Chuji, but it's not something they can affect. Even our dads, the current Inoshikacho, can't. Capture and interrogation, right? Sasuke asked. Naruto nodded. Yeah. So, Shikamaru will be the dead last just to be a pain, because it will make the administration break tradition, which is to pair the highest and lowest scoring genin together with the best kunoichi, which, again, won't be Ino even if she gets the rank. Right now, it's a toss-up between Hinata-chan and Sakura-chan. Sasuke frowned. It's not that hard to sabotage my results. If Nara does it, so can I. Not having to deal with Inuzuka is worth it. After a brief struggle not to react how he wanted, Naruto gave up and laughed. Got you something, said boy Yamanaka, accosting Sasuke at the market on Saturday, when Sasuke had dared hope he might have been safe for an hour-long excursion. Sasuke gritted his teeth and turned away from the stall selling noodles. I will not date you dash. Don't be silly. The blonde grinned, and not for the first time Sasuke doubted that either of the Yamanaka had a real crush on him. The two yellow-haired piranhas simply used the notion as social currency, and thus got away with harassing Sasuke. Sasuke was about to turn back to the noodles, when a book-shaped object was pressed into his chest. It's sort of like a treatise. Or monograph. I don't rightly know anyway, it's never been published, explained Yoshi. Sasuke took a closer look. The cover was faded dark gray with no writing whatsoever on it, and he didn't even realize that he had given in to his curiosity until he had it open and was reading the front page, the standard operations manual for the capture, interrogation and neutralization of S-class nuke Nin. It's from about a generation back, and I think one of the authors was an Uchiha. There's a lot of first-hand knowledge of the Sharingan included, and they seem to rely a bit too heavily on it for some scenarios, but anyway, I went to visit Ibiki-san at his work, but he was busy, so Anko-san let me borrow this dash. Who? Sasuke snapped, on the verge of headache from the combination of hunger, bemusement, and the avalanche of words. Ibiki-san is the head of the torture and interrogation department, explained Yamanaka, so cheerful as if he were talking about the shinobi daycare. I'm pretty sure we're not supposed to know that book exists, so if you could, not damage it, and give it back before the ANBU notice it's missing, that would be great. He smiled. Why did you give me this? Sasuke thought, but he did not need to ask. Yamanaka had told him before that he agreed with Sasuke's personal mission in principle, only protested the methods Sasuke chose to employ. And this was the proof. Yamanaka had brought him a document formulated upon years of experience by some of the strongest shinobi who specialized in the kind of task that Sasuke had set for himself. This was a declaration. And Sasuke found himself accepting it. He put the book inside his basket, careful that it would not make any contact with the tomatoes, even if any suspicious stains could be easily explained away in a place such as TNI. He forced himself to look up and meet the Yamanaka's eye. Yoshi was waiting for a verdict, biting his lip. Sasuke nodded. I'll get it back to you. What you said has merit. That was the best he could say. It would have to be enough. Going by the way Yamanaka beamed in response, it definitely was. Chapter 11, Twitter-pated. Chapter text. 11 graduating girls? Versus 16 boys? This year is just plain weird. Irika opened his mouth to protest that this was still just a projection based on the past 3 months, and it was very possible that any of these students might fail, or someone else might unexpectedly pass. Rock Lee did so last year, but the big shot Takuja weren't interested in what a lowly Chunin might tell them. Usually that ratio is more like 1 girl for every 3 boys, said Anko-san, laughing like it was a great joke. Did you put something in the water fountains at the academy? Awesome job though, snot wipers. Someone put Uchiha Sasuke and Yamanaka Ino into the class, said Mizuki, shaking his head mock-ruefully. Sasuke-kun's presence motivated a lot of girls to compete for his attention, and Ino-chan steered that competition toward shinobi skills. They are fangirls, but they are competent fangirls. Now that sounds like an oxymoron, grumbled Genma-san, and dodged the sharp tip of Anko-san's dango stick, aimed at his hand in retaliation. Mizuki laughed softly, and pushed a dislodged strand of silvery hair behind his ear. Just don't put any of them on a team with Sasuke-kun, and they'll be fine. Irika had a sudden idea. What if he crossed out a few of the numbers by the kids' names and rearranged them. It probably wouldn't affect anything, but as the class primary teacher he had some slight input on the civilian-born students' placement. The civilian-born generally weren't regarded as important, even though some of them had amazing potential. No one liked to admit that clan kids could be showed up by some nobody, and a lot of teams formed solely of civilian-born kids got dismissed out of hand by their assigned jounin sensei. But maybe, if he just found the right sort of teacher for them. You can't form a girls-only team. Mizuki laughed, clapping Irika on the shoulder. Irika gritted his teeth. Can't I? Nah. Nobody will be willing to take that on. And all 3 of them are fangirls. Who would dash? Is that a challenge? Asked Anko-san, effectively shutting up not only Mizuki, but the entire table. 'Cause I think Yugao might be interested. She turned to Irika. You propose that team, Bunny Rabbit, and I will blackmail the Hokage into signing off on it. Got me? Irika nodded, wide-eyed. He was not personally acquainted with Anko-san, who had invaded the informal teachers' conference because she was passing by and the topic caught her interest, whereupon she dragged Genma-san after her, but he had heard a little about her for Mibiki-san. And he was not going to argue with her. He liked living with all his appendages intact. Besides, he was beginning to feel personally invested in that all-kunoichi team. Of course, you can propose the team, Mizuki said. He sighed. But, Irika, it will never pass scrutiny. You'll just be wasting what little chance to affect things you actually have. His eyes were soft and understanding. Irika found himself smiling back. But with that easy, dry humor came also the realization that whatever happened, even if Hokage-sama tore the paper into tiny strips, it was Irika's privilege to speak his mind. And his mind was made up. Watch me, he thought. Say, Anko-san, he said instead, you would not be interested into taking some students of your own. You're getting a Genin team, Kakashi, the Sandaime informed him a moment after Kakashi arrived inside his office via the window. With all due respect, let's not start lying to each other now, Kakashi-kun. If you have any respect at all left for me, it's in the knowledge that you would die yourself if you tried to kill me again. Kakashi blinked in transition from his slouched posture to a stance that still counted as loose, but only in that it allowed him to defend against attacks from unexpected directions. The Sandaime sighed. That was not a threat, Kakashi. That was a reminder that if you are 3 hours late to important appointments, and yes, I do realize that our respective ideas of important differ, you can't expect to be welcome without some form of frustrated backlash. I am managing over 500 shinobi, and you are only one of them. Elite, yes. Invaluable, yes. Indispensable. No, Kakashi thought. But the Sandaime did not fill the word into the stretching silence. I was detained at the hospital, Hokage-sama, Kakashi informed his elderly leader. I've got a doctor's note. He pulled the piece of paper out of his book and put it on top of the desk. It was, actually, a genuine note. For the treatment of the self-inflicted burns, classed as training accident without doubt of intention, because Momoka-sensei had a crush on him and he asked nicely. Besides, it had been a training accident. More or less. Genin team, repeated Sandaime-sama, skipping over the issue of lateness. That is an extremely inadvisable idea, Kakashi pointed out, meaning no, but also meaning really fucking inadvisable idea. He tended to get his teams killed. With ANBU that was expected, but nobody wanted little kids' names on the memorial stone. That I know, the Sandaime informed him cheerlessly. You'll thank me no, shut up. You are taking this assignment. It's an order. You're retiring from ANBU. And I am delighted to inform you that you, indeed, have a choice in this. Decommissioning is always an option. You'd have me executed even if I don't try to kill you again? Kakashi inquired, more out of genuine curiosity than funereal humor. The old man shook his head. No. I would have you retired on a medical pretext and chakra sealed to prevent you from unintentionally harming yourself, or anybody else. The look in his eyes said I know what you did and also perhaps I have all the rope I need to hang you, so don't make me. Put like that, Kakashi knew that his future had been determined. So, who are these pint-sized death row inmates? Hiruzen thought these meetings would stop after Inoichi resigned from TNI. But here Hiruzen was, having a meeting with the torture and interrogation department's head scheduled for the graveyard slot. Perhaps these things were a hereditary part of the position. The young man looked grave, as he did nearly always, and with full rights to his gravity, but there was an air of nervous dissatisfaction around him, and that Hiruzen was not used to. Were it a different shinobi, it was likely that the yelling would have already started. What seems to be the problem, Ibiki-kun? Hiruzen inquired with a solid semblance of affability, in return for the scrupulous politeness. You are giving my Yamanaka to Hatake to kill, said Ibiki. Your Yamanaka. Ibiki disregarded the deadpan delivery and elucidated, Yamanaka Yoshi. He will be an asset to the department. If he lives to make Chunin. Which he won't, because you are putting him on a heavy combat team under Hatake and Hatake kills his teams. Kakashi-kun does not dash. I have proof, Ibiki announced. He offered a scroll. Hiruzen didn't take it. He knew what it contained, the statistics of Hound's performance as ANBU team captain, and the reasoning for why Hound had chiefly been dispatched on solo missions for the past few years. Kakashi is in therapy and he added when Ibiki scowled, since he had a point in that Kakashi being willing to die for his team had never been enough to keep those teams alive, I have personally ensured that he has additional motivation to succeed at this endeavor. Twice over. Once because he would rather murder his way through a line of child soldiers than have his chakra sealed, and the second time because of Minato-kuen's son. Ibiki nodded. Hokage-sama, giving Hound a team of rookie genin is a bad decision. He bowed and took his leave, not waiting for a dismissal, which Hiruzen Riley took as the fuck you it was. Yoshi watched Mizuki-sensei's individual approach toward Sasuke-kuen's taijutsu training for a while, expression growing darker and darker, until the first tremors of killing intent disturbed the otherwise mostly cheerful outdoors class. Ino poked her brother's shoulder. Keep it in check, moron. He's interfering with my project, Yoshi hissed through clenched teeth. Did you hear the crap he's spouting? He's reinforcing Uchiha's delusions, and what the hell can I do against that when it's coming from someone in position of power dash? Discredit, Ino pointed out coolly. As if that wasn't a basic lesson. Apparently, her idiot of a brother had only needed that nudge before the grinding clockwork inside his head started working properly again. Within moments he went from annoyed to plotting. Need any help? Ino inquired, watching Fuyumi-chan trounce Nariko-chan. Nah, Yoshi assured her. I've got it. If anything comes up, I'll let you know. I'll be constructing alibis and gleefully awaiting the destruction, Ino assured him, turning to the next spar. Keiko was also head and shoulders above most of their classmates. And she didn't have any kunoichi relatives either. Ino should organize a few bitching sessions, with very limited participation. This wouldn't be like the Sasuke fan club. This would be for the girls that had the chops to really make it. She had set out to take in a few protégés that would feel beholden later on. Maybe she should ask a real kunoichi to have a talk with them too. Civilian lives were different from ninja lives, even in aspects girls wouldn't normally think of: perfume, clothing, hair, hygiene, ambitions. The way they could tell their parents to fuck off and move out if they didn't feel like getting married at 16. In fact, Ino herself wasn't entirely certain on all those points. She could benefit too. Too bad Mum's off roaming the elemental countries. Yoshi hummed an agreement, but a moment later Irika-sensei called his name, and he walked into the circle to face off against Kiba. Can I have a moment of your time, Irika-sensei? Irika blinked, surprised to be sought out. He was a little shouty, and the children tended to be scared of him. While it was hardly the first time one of his students approached him for advice outside of class, Irika still wasn't used to it. Every time it caught him by surprise, doubly so if the request came from a clan child. On the other hand, he had learned to expect the unexpected from Yamanaka Yoshi, ever since that time they had met and spoken at the Hokage Mountain. Even this otherwise innocuous request was phrased with the sort of calculated politeness that pretended to be befitting of an academy student. The boy was 12. He had no business dumbing himself down to pass for his age. Irika sometimes wanted to wring clan heads' necks for training small children like they were ANBU cadets. Of course, Irika said after the awkward pause. He mentally pinched himself and beckoned to the boy. Come in. Sit down, oh right. He removed a pile of homework from the other chair. Sit, Yoshi-kun. What is the problem? Another philosophical question putting you to sleep? The boy chuckled, but whatever was weighing on his mind made him immediately return to seriousness. He folded his hands together and looked up at Irika with interest. I wanted to ask. What does it mean if someone does not really like you but pretends he does? Irika's first instinct was to assume that this was yet another of the Yamanaka games and refused to play along. But Yoshi-kun was not hamming up his naivety, and he wasn't faking innocence like he sometimes used to. His eyes were narrowed and trained on Irika's face like he was giving a test rather than asking an honest question, but Irika couldn't imagine what was going on here. Best just to go along with it. A lot of boys this age covered for embarrassment or insecurity with bravado. Yoshi-kun was undoubtedly a good enough actor to go beyond bravado and weave a more complicated mask. That they want to use you, Irika replied. Too easy, too obvious. Yoshi-kun didn't acknowledge the response, just tossed out another question. But how can you tell? Friends ask friends for things all the time. Friends ask, Irika repeated after him, they don't manipulate. And they offer things in return. Good friends do so without counting favors. This time there was a hint of approval from the boy, and Irika realized with a surge of discomfort that he did actually feel as though he were passing an exam. But how can you tell, Irika-sensei? What is the difference? A manipulator will too do stuff to make you happy. Irika frowned. That was right, of course, but also uncomfortable to hear from a small boy. Was Yoshi-kun having trouble with Sasuke-kun? Yoshi-kun had been provoking Sasuke-kun on purpose, although so far not with any noticeable harmful intentions. Perhaps that situation had slipped out of his control? Irika leaned back in his chair and briefly contemplated, eyeing the rushing clock hand and the pile of homework that he had to correct by Monday. He had no life, so he would have it all ready on time, but he couldn't muster any happiness about that. A friend will truly be sorry if they hurt you. At least he assumed so. He was friendly with a lot of people, but true friends. He wasn't good at that. But, protested Yoshi-kun, getting into the heat of the debate, the manipulator will apologize if it fits his plans, and he will not have a problem with getting over his pride, like a real friend might. 'Cause he's not apologizing for real, so it doesn't cost him. Irika could see the logic behind it. An apology should be hard, because there should be emotion behind it, regret at the very least. Regret for causing pain. Don't let someone like that hurt you again, Yoshi-kun, Irika insisted. He had known that Sasuke-kun was cold, and not completely right in the head. It was understandable, of course, and he kept hoping that someone would help where he couldn't, or that Sasuke-kun would find a way out of the darkness by himself, but it didn't seem to be happening. But what if I like him? Implored Yoshi-kun. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, his face flushed with desperate hope. And he's done nice things for me, but he's also hurt me. I mean, he apologized. He always apologizes. But then he always does it again. Oh, this was not just friendship. This was a crush. Listen to me, Yoshi-kun. Irika stood from his chair and sank to one knee in front of the curled-up boy. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. His heart went out to him. You are worth more than that. No one will be allowed to treat you badly, but sometimes it is up to you to say no. You just need to tell someone, okay? I will help, I'm sure your dad will too. Yamanaka-sama better would, or Irika would have a few choice words for the man. And we will deal with any problem. Yoshi-kun sighed. He unlaced his fingers and his hand came to settle on Irika's shoulder to complete the circle. Sensei. I think he's lying to me. I don't have any proof, and then I feel so guilty about thinking that of him, because of course he wouldn't do something like that to me, and I just feel like such a bastard. Language, Yoshi-kun, Irika admonished, but took care to keep his voice gentle. He was almost there. Any moment now, Yoshi-kun would find the courage and share. Sorry, sensei. But I feel like such a heel for even suspecting him of anything. You should follow your instincts, Yoshi-kun, Irika implored. They will be invaluable to you once you become a shinobi. In the field, good instincts often mean the difference between life and death. I see. Yoshi-kun kept his head down and his eyes on his sandals for a while. Then he looked up. His expression wasn't resolute or defeated, it was pitying. Irika-sensei? Yes, Yoshi-kun? The boy slipped from touching distance and stood at the threshold of Irika's office, straight-backed and professionally cool. In this model situation, I was performing the role of yourself. My hypothetical antagonist was Mizuki-sensei. Please follow your advice before it is too late. He nodded in farewell and left, while Irika was still too stunned to react. What had just happened? What did Yoshi-kun mean about Mizuki? Kakashi was drawn to the glade first by the killing intent, then by the yelling and finally by the chakra used. Chakra was used every day, all over Konoha by everybody, and their elderly Nin-ken, so Kakashi would have passed an innocent spar in the woods without giving it a second thought. Even a non-innocent spar, because some shinobi, for a random example Anko, liked to spice things up and didn't consider it a real fighting if it didn't include death threats and offensive language. Killing intent too was a weapon and needed to be honed. But all three at once. In a place that wasn't an official training ground? He burst through the canopy. There was a familiar Chunin facing off against an unfamiliar Chunin. Kakashi raised his Hitaiate. The Sharingan took stock of the scene, catalogued micro-expressions, predicted movements. And he body flickered just in time to snatch the familiar Chunin out of the way of a lethal Fuma Shuriken. Shit. The unfamiliar Chunin didn't stand and gawp, he jumped to the trees and tried to flee. Don't let him dash. Kakashi didn't care about what the familiar Chunin was trying to tell him. He had his own mind, had constructed a sufficient picture of the situation for the moment, and he was the ANBU hound. So, he had the unfamiliar Chunin paralyzed, unconscious, bound and tagged within 15 seconds. He dropped his cargo back in the glade, and surveyed the bleeding young man that was actually sitting there and gawping. It would have been unattractive were it not so unself-consciously flattering. Let me guess, Kakashi quipped, you're going to report me again. The Chunin finally shut his mouth, but instead of panicking or getting angry at the interference, he seemed to be relieved. I'll definitely mention you in my report, Shinobi-san, but I think I'll try to be complimentary this time. Don't hurt yourself, Kakashi bade him dryly, and offered a hands up. It was accepted, although it resulted in some stumbling and swaying. Ow. I guess I'm already hurt enough for one day. Kakashi was reluctant to take his hand away. The Chunin was wounded worse than he had initially seemed. He was losing more blood than it was wise to lose. I'll take you to the hospital. The Chunin looked down at the package addressed to the TNI department that Kakashi had ungently deposited on the ground. Shouldn't you dash? Kakashi shrugged, disinterested. They've got it. Who dash? Cat and Marmot jumped out of the trees and immediately gravitated toward Kakashi for a sit rep. This he provided with a few signs: suspected traitor apprehended, full report pending, arrest. The handoff was utterly silent, and Kakashi didn't feel the need to watch over his still subordinates, so he grabbed the Chunin and body flickered them to the hospital before the charming moron could bleed out. He noticed the tears only after they arrived in the lobby. Are you in that much pain, Dash? No. The Chunin shook his head vehemently, starting off a new wave of tears. I'm sorry. I'm just such an idiot. He wiped his nose into the back of his palm, which he in turn wiped into his trouser leg. The trousers were a write-off anyway, so that made sense. I trusted him. Kakashi nodded sagely. True. What an idiot. Trusted his fellow shinobi. Whoever heard of such an dash? The Chunin snorted. For a second there you almost seemed nice. Kakashi was prevented from further flirting by one of the medics Nin finally noticing the bleeding shinobi in need of medical care and approaching them. Sensei, he addressed the woman, one idiot who let himself get stabbed in the back, both literally and figuratively. For you. He nudged the Chunin into the cruel hands of the medic. What an arse, the Irionin rudely commented behind Kakashi's back. You don't know the half of it, replied the Chunin. Chapter 12, Graduation. Chapter Text. Kakashi got his Chunin back in a satisfactory condition a little over an hour later. An hour which he had spent very patiently staking out the lobby, looking perfectly inconspicuous behind his Ika. What's the verdict? He asked, cheerfully insinuating himself at the Chunin's side. Restricted from training, but ambulatory, replied the young man, affably enough. By which I mean, you can go away now and leave me be. He made a shooing gesture with both hands. Kakashi had expected some resistance, so he didn't take this disheartening rejection personally. He put his first contingency plan into action. I'm taking you to dinner. The Chunin did not even grace him with a look. No, you're not. I saved your life. That was worth at least a little consideration, wasn't it? Would it be such a pain to let Kakashi buy him a meal? Or, admittedly, probably pay for the meal because Kakashi had misplaced his wallet again. Which means we're quid pro quo on that, pointed out the man, looking at Kakashi with a shade of amused expectation covering a well of hurt. And you still owe me for saving you from making the mistake of hurting children. Kakashi didn't know what to do. He could have annihilated this man in 100 different ways within the next 2 seconds, but talking to him was difficult. And while Ika might have had some advice on how to act in these situations, Kakashi's underdeveloped and atrophied social instinct urged him not to follow it. And, now that he thought of it, maybe this wasn't the best time. The man had just been betrayed by a friend, and was probably still in considerable physical pain. Kakashi nodded to himself. Rain check it was. You're still teaching at the academy, aren't you? The Chunin nodded. Irika. And suddenly his face lit up. Ibiki-san. Kakashi watched in mute awe as the object of his unsavory interest seemed to become genuinely happy at the sight of the most famous torturer in Fire Country. It was frightening, and perhaps shouldn't have been unexpected, since Ibiki had reacted strongly when, years ago, Kakashi hinted at his interest in the then teenager. Whatever the connection between these two ninjas was, Ibiki being fond of Irika, apparently, meant that Kakashi risked his physical and mental integrity, or whatever thereof was left, just talking to him. But Kakashi wanted to talk to him. And more. Definitely more. Did Irika-kun have to be so relentlessly charming? And now he was walking away practically arm in arm with the Oni from TNI, and leaving Kakashi behind without even a second glance, and this wasn't fair. I was tipped off by one of my students, Irika explained, pulling the scrubs tighter around himself. His shirt, mesh and trousers hadn't survived the surgery preparation, and his vest had not been returned to him. He got a receipt, but that did exactly nothing to keep him warm in this intentionally chilly underground room. It was the nice one for the polite interrogations. Irika guessed that one of the less nice ones was currently occupied by Mizuki, and reminded himself that there would be time for bawling his eyes out later. Not in front of Ibiki-san. Ibiki-san frowned at him. Which one? What did they know? What tipped them off? We might have to bring them in dash. It was Yamanaka Yoshikun, and he dash. Oh, that boy, Ibiki-san relaxed and sank back into his chair. Right. What do you mean, right? Irika's acquaintance with Ibiki-san began when Irika was still an academy student, and one of his pranks had gotten a little away from him in the direction of property destruction. Irika hadn't meant to level that building, and either his genuine contriteness or the fact that he had had the skill to do it in the first place caught Ibiki-san's attention. That first conversation had happened in the not-nice interrogation room, and while it had remained within the limits of a literal conversation, the effect it had had on Irika was profound. And lasting. He dearly hoped that Yoshikun hadn't met Ibiki-san under similar circumstances. Inoichi trained him personally, Ibiki-san explained, and, right, that made sense. It wasn't widely known that Ibiki-san had succeeded Yamanaka-sama at his post, but Irika had been aware, and of course these two men would be acquainted. Boy's got people instincts that I envy him, and is an absolute conditioning savant, and instead of intel he wants to go into psychology. That would be a criminal waste. I'm not letting it happen dash. Oh. Irika especially didn't want to imagine any of his little students in one of Ibiki-san's specialized cells getting to work, but his mind forced the picture on him anyway, and it was sadly so very, very realistic. He could see it. Yoshikun was a little scary, wasn't he? Especially because he usually appeared so normal. Obviously, that was a facade, but it was masterful. Even Irika had thought Yoshi was just a typical clan child, a little full of himself, somewhat aware of the realities of shinobi life and therefore sufficiently motivated to apply himself, and a little weird. All clan members were a little weird. It went with the territory. Quite, agreed Ibiki-san, greatly amused under that smooth, cool exterior. The moment he gets his Chunin vest, I have an apprenticeship open for him. Irika really, honestly, did not want any of his students to end up here, in this dark, bloody, cruel place. But if any of them had to, he believed that Yoshi-kun could take it. In the meantime, I've got to make sure Hatake doesn't get him killed. If you have any idea short of assassinating Hatake, or if you have any viable idea for assassinating Hatake Assassination is not exactly my specialty, Irika said dryly. This was not how he had imagined his interrogation would go. And I have full confidence in Yoshi-kun. He will twist his Jounin-sensei around his fingers. Maybe it would be best to consult directly with him? Ibiki-san blinked at him. And then he smiled. That is an excellent idea, Irika. Years ago, Inoichi told him to go home and think about it. At that time Kakashi had heard, unless you're absolutely certain that what you might have together is worth ruining his life and getting him killed, don't do it. He realized now that he had heard wrong. That what Inoichi had meant was probably closer to don't do it unless you can treat him like a human being, and let yourself be treated like a human being by him, and in hindsight Inoichi was right. Ibiki had been less solicitous about it, but he had also been Kakashi's direct superior at that time, so he did have the actual authority to give Kakashi an order. Kakashi was not sure he knew anything about feeling human or people treating one another like humans, but he was going to at least try. That was the greatest difference between then and now. 3 years ago, he did not have the ability to decide what he wanted. Now he knew. Patsy, Anko reported, pulling off the rubber gloves. Inoichi commended Ibiki for managing to get her to use gloves at all. Anko liked working barehanded. But gloves were easy to disguise with genjutsu for whenever the personal touch was required, and it was much safer for the interrogator. How did we overlook him? He inquired woodenly. The knowledge that there had been a traitor at the Shinobi Academy, in a position of power over Inoichi's children, although Inoichi's children were trained well enough to recognize abusers and take just enough from them that they could collect proof of wrongdoing, shattered his self-control. There was a reason why he had remained in the observing room and sent Anko to do the job. Anko turned her head to the side, her neck cracked loudly. He's been recruited recently. The run-of-the-mill power-hungry idiot with an injured ego. Sensei took advantage of him with zero effort. Inoichi wondered how many days in a week he could get drunk before he had a problem. Today was going to end up with another long night of intoxicated commiseration at the Nara compound, he just knew it. He didn't actually manage to do anything except try to demoralize a handful of preteens, Anko assured him. And we don't want the weaklings that fell for it in the Corps anyway. Inoichi quirked an eyebrow. Speaking of, I heard you might be taking a team? Yeah, right. After Sandame-sama retires, and I stop being an in-your-face reminder of the Hokage's failures, maybe? Sides, haven't you heard? I ain't got clearance from Psych to work with kids. Inoichi, who had let Anko personally tutor his own children and been the one to sign that particular Psych report, simply looked at her. If you want me to clear you dash. Nope. She exclaimed cheerfully. I'm a dangerous dissident. Doubtful loyalty and accursed zeal and, deep-seated feelings of resentment. What if I contaminated the next generation? Inoichi returned her smirk. As you wish. Tell me if you ever change your mind. The dog barked. What? Inuzuka's head snapped up and his eyes fell on the door of the classroom an instant before Irika-sensei walked in, closely followed by Daikoku-sensei. Sasuke noted that their homeroom teacher looked tired. In fact, he must have been exhausted, because his attempt to cover up his limp faltered halfway to his desk. Class. Class. Daikoko-sensei snapped. The chatter cut off, and after a quick shuffle the students were all seated. Yesterday, Daikoko-sensei spoke as Irika-sensei sat down and attempted without significant success to look calm. Mizuki was apprehended on grounds of treason. Silence. This time it took the whispers a little longer to stop. Sasuke took the chance to look around the room. Aburame, as usual, showed nothing. Nara seemed disconcerted, so that was a dead end. And Yamanaka? Sasuke wished he could have been surprised. The fangirl was leaning closer to her brother, sharing her observations. For just a moment, Yoshi looked smug, before he shifted back into a semblance of shock, mimicking the students around him. I urge you, continued Daikoko-sensei, to report any interactions you have had with Mizuki that have made you feel unsafe. Likewise, if he wanted from you information outside of taught subjects, or if he asked you to perform any extracurricular actions. There was a creak and then a crash. Haruno's desk had broken, and was now lying in two pieces on the floor. Haruno blinked at the teachers, at least as bemused as they were. Sensei, I have no idea what just happened. I am so sorry. She seemed to be on the verge of crying. Which in no way explained why girl Yamanaka tried to smother her giggles in boy Yamanaka's shoulder. Irika-sensei covered his face with his hands, and let his senior colleague manage this situation. Pain in the arse, muttered Nara. "'S not his fault," protested Akimichi, while Daikoko-sensei snapped at Haruno to move to one of the empty seats. "Silence!" yelled the teacher, nearing the end of patience. "You may submit your written reports to Irika-sensei, Suzume-sensei or myself. Be ready to provide clarification as needed if your reports uncover new information. This is a standard part of shinobi duties. If any of you have a problem with this task, you have no business getting a hitayate." Questions? There were none. Sasuke pulled out a notebook, turned to a new page and started writing all that he remembered. He was not sure how much of it could be useful information to anyone, but seeing all those small instances of Mizuki's non-standard and occasionally outright rule-defying behavior written as a list was sobering. Much of what he believed, many of his basic tenets, had been told to him by traitors. First that man and now one of his teachers. Yamanaka had warned him, hadn't he? Maybe Sasuke should at least hear him out next time. "Hi, Yoshinobu-san!" yelled Ino. Shikamaru scrambled off of his bed and fumbled for his trousers. Wait, today was not Saturday. It was Tuesday. And it was late afternoon. Shikamaru was in fact wearing his trousers, because had just woken up from a nap, and Ino's unnaturally perky voice had invaded a very pleasant dream. He muttered a prayer for Ino to trip into a ditch, hit her head and suffer amnesia, that would force her to be held back at the academy, while he and Chuji graduated, and then considered the objects within his bedroom. Tragically, all methods of barring the door and barricading himself inside involved far too much effort. Pain in the arse, he concluded, and went to reconnoiter the situation. The Twitter hit him first. It wasn't just Ino. There were girls, plural. There were a lot of girls, and no boys. Not even Yoshi, who was definitely a boy, but sometimes made the girls forget this fact, and Shikamaru would very much like to know how he did it, because engendering that sort of false kinship was indescribably useful. The initial assessment of a lot resolved into 6 by the time Shikamaru found a shadow on top of the staircase that he could blend into. There were 6 girls in the living room of Shikamaru's house, led by Ino, who was currently trying to convince Shikamaru's mother to host them for the evening. Not just trying. Shikamaru realized with bone-deep horror that she was succeeding. "And these are the girls in my class that are definitely going to pass the graduation exam," Ino explained. "You know Hinata-chan and Sakura-chan already, and these are Ami-chan and Keiko-chan and Fuyumi-chan. They are all like Sakura-chan." They were not. Haruno Sakura was, thank the gods. A unique case. Shikamaru wasn't entirely sure what was wrong with her, but Ino doted on the girl, so something must have been very, very wrong with her. The other girls were annoying but, as far as he could tell, sane. "You two are such good friends," one of the females said in that sweet tone that females use to express jealousy and spite. Ino, proving that she was years ahead of them in this particular game, lowered her voice to a disturbingly intimate tone. "Sakura-chan and I could have been bitter rivals, but isn't it nicer to just share?" Shikamaru shuddered. Uchiha was so lucky he was not here to witness this horror. "I see, Ino-chan," said Shikamaru's mother. She was observing the invasion of females in her home and smiling. "When is Yuki coming home?" "Hopefully in time for the graduation," Ino reported. It was only long-term acquaintance with her that allowed Shikamaru to see the hint of upset in her expression. To everyone else it would have seemed like Ino was used to her mother not being around and treating it like it was of no consequence to her. "Well, then it does fall to me, after all," said Shikamaru's mother. "Let's have some serious kunoichi talk." Ino's eyes closed in relief, but a moment later she had already wiped that emotion off her face, and was directing the girls to take seats on the furniture. "Let's start with the first question each and every one of you will be asked after you graduate, said Shikamaru's mother, perching in Pop's armchair like a queen presiding over her court. "What are your aspirations? And let me warn you, if I hear anything at all about boys, I'll have you doing push-ups until your arms fall off." "So cool," sighed one of the girls, awestruck. Hyuga-chan squeaked, but stopped trembling as soon as Ino pulled her into her side. Shikamaru considered if any of the scarring information he might have heard forthwith would be worth it, and decided to flee while he could. There were always the woods, the deer and the clouds. "How did you know about Mizuki?" Sasuke asked during their weekly spar. Naruto backflipped out of the way of a kick that almost shattered his jaw. "I noticed him being a dick to Irika-sensei, and then I heard him say really suspicious stuff when he taught one-on-one." Sasuke sneered as he threw a barrage of shuriken. "When he taught me, you mean?" Naruto sneered as well, but at the memory. "You too." But he told Ami-chan that unless she specialized in seduction, she would never make it past Genin. "Who the fuck says something like that to an 11-year-old girl?" "Haraguchi," Sasuke said, frowning as he tried to sweep Naruto's legs from under him, and followed up with another high kick to take advantage of Naruto's half-directed jump. "That's bullshit. She could do infiltration and sabotage and maybe dash." Naruto fumbled a block and they ended up in an unintentional mutual headbutt. They crashed to the ground, nursing their respective concussions. "I totally agree," said Naruto once the world stopped spinning so hard that he felt like he would puke if he opened his mouth. Sasuke groaned from the grass next to him. "Why can't I ever tell?" Naruto sighed. "'Cause they're trained for this shit, Sasuke-kun, and if they turn it directly on you, there's nothing you can do." "How are you different from them, then?" Sasuke demanded. That was actually a very good question. Naruto pondered this for a while, and then said, "I'm loyal to Konoha." Sasuke laughed. Naruto hadn't ever before heard him laugh, and he didn't even mind that Sasuke was laughing at him. This was good. This was progress. "Fine," Sasuke snapped, a little breathless from the spar, the pain and the laughter. "Fine, I'll give this moronic idea a chance. It must be the concussion. Help me get home. I'll return the book you lent me." "What is Shikamaru-kun doing?" Asuma asked, watching the crystal ball over his father's shoulder. His father sighed. "Protesting." Asuma looked at the right tilt of his father's mouth, and then again down at the fisheye view of Nara Shikamaru, a lazy 12-year-old boy, chained to a tree in front of the Shinobi Academy. "Protesting what?" Asuma asked obediently. He hated it when his father led him like this. It felt patronizing, like a blatant put-down, but in this instance his curiosity overrode his personal issues. "The team assignments," the Hokage replied wryly. Asuma blinked. The team assignments aren't finalized yet. Aren't there, like, 5 weeks until the graduation? His father nodded. There are. And Shikamaru-kun has worked relentlessly over the past 3 years to receive the exact borderline mark that would allow him to pass yet guarantee that he was the dead last of the class. By now he must know the subject matter and the grading system better than his teachers, to receive such an exact percentage. Genius, huh? Asuma replied, although they had both long since known that. Counted on it too. Asuma had only one reason for returning from the fire daimyo's court, and that was the team he was promised. Nepotism? What nepotism? Well, he was entitled to some compensation for all the shit he had to deal with just because his father wasn't smart enough to say no to the Nidame's dying wish. Oh, yes, agreed the Hokage, smiling around the mouthpiece of his pipe. He had figured out the team assignments too. And I agree that by convention he would be placed on a team with Uchiha Sasuke and either Hyuga Hinata or Yamanaka Ino, but we are not breaking up the Ino Shikacho formation, regardless of final rankings. Asuma had counted on this. That team was his. Still, Shikamaru-kun does have a point. Asuma's self-assured smile froze. His father always did this. Always. He took perverse pleasure in letting people's dreams build up, and then bringing them crashing down. We speak of reforming the Ino Shikacho, but we have in fact 2 Yamanaka in that class. And of those, I dare say that the boy is a little more easygoing. The Hokage moved his hand over the crystal ball, and instead of a little Nara chained to a tree with a snacking Akimichi by his side, there was a blond boy of the same age, stuffing a fistful of peanuts into his mouth and nearly choking as he laughed at the Yoshi Shikacho sign Akimichi-kun was holding up. I wasn't gone that long, Asuma grumbled. His father caught the inquiry, of course, and his smile widened. No. Yamanaka Yoshi is assumed an extramarital child of the clan, and was adopted by Inoichi-sana. Must be about 7 years already. How the time flies. Asuma stuck a cigarette between his teeth and lit it. You mean I could have my dream team without the hassle of a girl? His father's expression darkened. Asuma found himself wanting to take a step back. Damn it. Damn it all, that was such a stupid thing to say. And he didn't even mean it. He hoped Kurenai would never hear of this. No, said the Hokage. Why not? Not, Dad. Just switch them, and give me the boy. Not on your life, Hiruzen snapped. Asuma had always assumed that just because he was the son of the Hokage, he would be allowed to coast on life. It was aggravating. I am sure you would like a vacation instead of a teaching assignment, but the future of these children is more important. Asuma's forehead furrowed. Hey, there's no call for that. Asuma, Hiruzen rubbed his temple and reminded himself that his son had never taught anyone, and he did not understand that the dynamics of Genin teams were very, very different from the dynamics of any regular team, and that the Ino Shikacho combination should never have been enforced straight out of the academy. This was the idiocy of the public at work, and the best they could do to mitigate the consequences was make sure that there was a lot of personality clashing on the team. How else could the children's edges be rubbed off for future teamwork? If there was no friction, there could be no professional growth. Explain, he told himself. Teach. Don't expect this young man, no matter how smart, to just instinctively understand what you have had a lifetime and half to learn by observation. Asuma, he said, if I gave you these 3 calm, friendly, well-adjusted boys to work with, they would have perfect teamwork and a perfectly rounded-out skill set, and die the first time out in the field when they had to work with someone they didn't know. And Asuma was very, very smart, so the next thing to come out of his mouth, discounting cigarette smoke, was, "Is that why you put me on a team with Guy?" Hiruzen smiled at the memory of those golden times. It has served you well. Also, the alternative had been Minato-kun's team, which meant Kakashi. And, contrary to what Asuma seemed to believe, Hiruzen loved him far too much to risk him needlessly. Yoshino had shouted herself hoarse before striding off to the kitchen where, judging by the banging noises, she was about to charcoal a piece of meat just so she could improve her mood by watching her unrepentant son and her poor husband try and swallow their dinner. Shikako knocked, waited for the requisite 5 seconds for his child to hide anything a father would not wish to see, and let himself into his son's room. "How long have you been planning that?" he inquired, not hiding his appreciation for the plan. It had, naturally, zero effect on the team assignments, but it had made a lot of people chuckle, including the Hokage and Shikamaru's future sensei, so it had been definitely worth the effort. Not out of the academy yet, and Shikamaru was already gaining a reputation. About 8 years, the boy admitted, turning over his homework sheet. He seemed to be filling in the answers at random, sometimes substituting stick figure sketches. Shikako considered whether some measure of parental disapproval might have been called for, and then decided that it was all far too troublesome, and of course his son knew what he was doing. Homework sheets, honestly. Shikako could absolutely see how nobody would take that sort of crap seriously. In other words, since you learnt about Yoshi's existence, he estimated. That was a long damn time, not even taking into account that Shikamaru was 12. Shikamaru shrugged. The homework sheet was folded in half and stuffed inside his bag. I found out about our future team and about Yoshi's existence on the same day. Took me a while to figure out what it all actually meant. A while, huh? Shikamaru shrugged again, like it wasn't important. But it must have been, because otherwise he would not have carried it around for 8 years without saying a word. Shikako knew that his son was brilliant and a procrastinator, and had an exceptional strategic mind, but it still shocked him that he was capable of playing this long a game at this young an age. He wondered if the fight between the boys had featured in it, and hoped that it did not. That showed a level of callousness that Shikako would prefer not to see in his own child. "Look, Dad," Yoshi scratched at his loose hair. "I know it's unfinished. I'm sorry. I overestimated myself. Shush, said Inoichi. He rubbed his chin. He had observed both Hyuga Hinata and Uchiha Sasuke over the past few weeks, and what he had seen was perhaps not entirely satisfying, but in its own way astonishing. You both picked cases that had proven too difficult for experienced professionals for your learning projects. That was a stupid decision. You let your pride overtake your common sense, and in the field that will be fatal. Yoshi wilted, and so did Ino, although she was a little less free with displaying it. Yuki watched impassively from her side of the sofa. But Inoichi continued, "You have consulted your choices of subject with me, and I have signed off on them both. Judged solely on your grasp of theory and performance within the field." Yuki smiled. The children's eyes widened in anticipation. "You pass." They punched the air out of his lungs, throwing themselves at him and clinging with all 8 limbs like a hairy, blonde octopus. And Yuki, the evil woman, just laughed. Irika deposited the final class rankings, with complete, detailed scores, on Hokage-sama's desk. He could not quite describe the relief he felt at being rid of that document. It had burned in his hand. Not literally, of course, but his discomfort was real. "Is this a joke?" demanded Shikako-sama from behind Hokage-sama's shoulder. "No," Irika said, having entered that area of dispassion that lay on the opposite side of hysterical amusement. "That's the real results. To be accurate, that's the result of having a Nara and 2 Yamanaka in class, and if you would be so kind as to excuse me, I believe that I urgently need at least a month of vacation. Irika-kun," Hokage-sama stopped him before he could vamoose. Irika pivoted. His shoulders slumped. "Yes, sir?" "How many of them underperformed on purpose?" Irika counted on his fingers and finally settled on, "At least 4. At most 6. "May I go? "Which ones?" Irika solemnly scrutinized his sandals, and then looked up to meet Hokage-sama's eye, pretending that he hadn't noticed the murder of Jounin gathered around the edges of the office, and hanging on to every word of the conversation, and that he definitely had not noticed that one silver-haired, masked Jonin lurking in a corner. Nara Shikamaru and Aburame Shino have done so consistently for years. Uchiha Sasuke did it only for the graduation exam, and very clearly to avoid being placed on a team with Inuzuka Kiba, presumably warned by Yamanaka Yoshi. Yoshi-kun can do better too, I'm sure. Hyuga Hinata does not test well due to anxiety. And I have suspicions about Haruno Sakura, but she may just be that physically weak for real. Provided that she could instinctively use chakra to boost her strength, but Irika considered that idea far-fetched. Well, Hokage-sama allowed after 3 pulls from his pipe. It seems that the best worst team shall not go to Kakashi-kun after all. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.